Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday and happy publication day to our very special guest tonight. Welcome to a Shelf Help Club author event with Casey Davis, who's celebrating her new book. And this is our book of the moment for May and June, which is Who Deserves Your Love. Casey is a therapist, speaker, author, and social media sensation who is famous for her practical, non-judgmental advice. She coined the term struggle care, which is a way to learn to care for ourselves when and be kind to ourselves when whatever the struggle is going on in our life. Casey says, even when things are hard, you still deserve joy at home, in relationships, and in life. And that is so self-help. So I'm so excited to celebrate with you today. It's so nice to have you here, and welcome, Casey.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
And the book is out here so it's the States and the Canada today, and it's out in the UK on the 15th, I think, next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're starting our read along on the 19th. We're going to read it for May and June. And I know some of our members have got copies already because they've got advanced copies, and other people are on the pre-order. So we'll be sharing links as we go. Audience, just before we start, a reminder, your mics are off, but your cameras can be on, and we love to see your faces. And we'll be using the chat box to share any questions. David's in there, so go and say hello and log in. And just before we start, a reminder that the Shelf Help Club is the world's first dedicated self-help book club and community. And we're all about celebrating self-development and working on our inner selves and our mental health by reframing self-help as a kind of positive, consistent practice and something to be done with friends always. So Casey, I'm so happy that you've come into my life via your UK publishers, because I'm now fully down the rabbit hole of I've like done the TED talk, and then I love the social, I love the book, and like keeping things really simple and non-judgmental and super practical is very much what I really try and do with like all the events we do and all the books we read. So it's really nice to because you're a therapist and you have the expert head, but you kind of really break things down, I think, and that's what I love about this book. But do you really hate the term self-care? Because I've seen that you say that before.
I don't hate it. What I hate is how certain therapeutic terms will kind of bubble up into the level of pop psychology. And it's good because it brings a lot of awareness to some really important concepts. But there's this thing that happens when you get to that kind of level of the zeitgeist of whatever that concept is, which is that some of the meaning kind of gets stripped from it. And then eventually it kind of gets commodified. And then you have, companies kind of using it. And then you have wellness influencers. And it kind of gets marketed as something more or less than it really is. And sometimes it can lose some power when that happens.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I really do resonate with the term struggle care. Can you talk about that a little bit for anyone
Yeah.
who doesn't know you yet?
Yeah, I think, my journey, I got sober when I was like 16. I was sent to a teen rehab after a really severe drug addiction, had some trauma in my background, and started this journey of really I guess, self-help of, really trying to go to therapy, really trying to learn and grow and heal and mature. And along the way, self-care and self-improvement kind of became just like another way that I was measuring my self-worth.
Mhm.
Like when I was doing well and I had my routines and I was, mature and I was enlightened and I was productive and I was
Journaling.
optimized, right? Like that made me feel like I was worthy and I was good enough. And then when I wasn't doing those things, like it was kind of a cycle, right? When I felt disorganized, when I felt like I wasn't productive, when I felt like I wasn't being healthy, when I was struggling, then it felt like, oh, now I'm failing. And so
Mm,
everything was this like try fail cycle.
mm,
And so I finally got to the place where, that this term struggle care is an attempt to break that cyclical thinking, where instead of self-help being this measure by which we are good enough or not good enough or failing or succeeding, instead it's this idea that like in the midst of the struggle of life, we're just learning how to care for ourselves.
yeah, and that's so soft, so much softer and kinder, isn't it? And it feels a lot more doable. So
Mhm.
I would love to know, what does a day in we well, what does a day in a week in the life look like of an author, therapist, all the stuff. I keep saying nearly same podcaster, but you told me that the podcast is kind of winding down.
Yeah.
But currently you're spending a lot of time doing a lot of different things. So how do you manage your time? Because you're also a parent.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I've got two little kids. They're 5 and 7, and I'm married. So this is such a great question because, like, when I went to rehab, I was 16 years old, and I was a crazy kid. I was all over the place. I did not know how to take care of myself. I was chaotic. I was all this stuff. And I was in rehab for like 2.5, well, 1.5, a year and a half. And it was very strict. Think of like the strictest boarding school ever, right? It's like we wake up at 6:30, we read for 15 minutes, we have breakfast at 7, it's 5 minutes long, and then we have chores till this time, and then chores are checked, and you must shower every day and you must brush your hair. So everything was very regimented.
Mhm.
And um you would think that, like, oh, well, if you did that every day for a year and a half, like, clearly that's how you make a habit.
Yeah.
um and in the like self-help world, we put a lot of emphasis on these kind of routines about like your morning routine and your evening routine, and how you structure that day to be optimized. And so I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was in my mid 30s, but obviously I've had it my whole life. And I never could figure out like why in particular, like those kinds of things never stuck for me. And I would like watch people's like what I do in a day or like listen to my morning routine. I'd be like, wow, I suck. I don't do
Mm.
any of these things. Or I'd start them and then I'd stop them. So all that to say, I'm so happy to answer this question by saying that um, I wake up late every day after hitting the snooze about 5 times. And then I rush my children into their clothes and usually forget to brush my teeth as I'm running out of the house and getting them into the car, probably a little more stressed than I should be. And we get them to school and they're on time and it's fine. And they eat breakfast at school because I'm usually too rushed in the morning to feed them. And um, so they eat at school. I come home. I always stop at a coffee shop and buy a coffee despite it not being in my budget. And it's one of the most delightful parts of my day. And I come home and I drink my expensive coffee and I sit and hyper fixate on whatever project I've been working on. And there's usually like a project that I want to be working on and then a list of things I should be working on. And I
Mm.
squeeze the self-discipline out for like 45 minutes of like looking at what needs to be done and seeing what I'm going to be in trouble with if I don't get it done. And I eke those things out and then I go back to hyperfixating on things. Um, and then my kids come home around 3:34. I get them in the door. And I try to spend that like hour of getting them in and like really attuned to them.
Yeah.
Playing a little pretend, making some snacks, asking about their day. And then we kind of are a parallel play house, right? They run off to play. I maybe sit on the couch and read a book, or maybe I go back to something on my computer, kind of near them, um, and then feed them dinner. And my husband usually comes home before or after their bedtime. And then my husband will go into his room and do his hyperfixations, where there's a special spot for me in the corner with a very comfortable chair, an armchair, so that I can sit there and do whatever I'm doing. And we sit there and parallel play with each other. And then I do that until I feel so tired that I know I'm going to hate myself in the morning and go to bed with my makeup on.
On repeat.
Yeah.
It's just, well, that's real life, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you, so when you were like it was when you were 16, so when you were a teenager, but it's like with those rules and like you stuck to them because there was somebody literally there
Yeah.
telling you to do those things, but
Yeah.
they,
Someone making me. And then
yeah,
there were some things that I did for a long time because I felt like, well, this is what makes me successful. This is what
yeah.
makes me an adult.
Hmm. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting then that we're going to be talking about boundaries tonight because we'll be going into the book in a minute. Because I always kind of assume that boundaries are some kind of routine or are some kind of rules, but it sounds like you don't really respond that well to rules, but you're really good at boundaries.
Yeah, I think for most of us, we're raised thinking that boundaries are how we get other people to treat us correctly,
Mm.
how we
Yeah.
say no and don't overextend ourselves. And there are some aspects of that, but boundaries is really more an internal understanding
Mm.
of kind of where I end and where everybody else begins. And so, for example, coming to the place in my life where I realized there are some things that I really value about honesty and integrity and emotional regulation and anti-racism and family time and like these things that I really want to make sure that I'm spending the energy practicing and being good at and having that be a part of my day and realizing that like there might be some other ideas in the world about like routine and structure and being waking up early and whatever that maybe aren't as high of a value to me and that it's okay for me to decide I have a different value or to say hey my brain doesn't really work that way. It's also okay for there to be like a category of things that like yeah no I probably should be doing that probably and I'm not. Like I probably should get more sleep. That's important. Sure. And
One
also
day
just
maybe.
like, yeah, just like I can't really be good at all the things all the time. And so, learning to hold something in a, yeah, that's good. Yep, I should do it. Yeah, probably not doing it. And I'm not going to hate myself for it either.
Yeah, well, that's the crucial bit, isn't it? I really
Yeah. And
like,
that's boundaries.
yeah, and I really like your definition of boundaries, which is behaviors, feelings, and beliefs, but always my own. That was a definition that I've seen you talk about, because quite often you're right. I mean, we talk about boundaries a lot in the book club, and I do feel like, yeah, there is that idea that it's like how to stop people behaving a certain way so you can protect your energy, so you can protect your peace, so you can do what is important to you, but it's not, you're saying it's not necessarily, well, it's not about the other people. It's about you. It's whatever you can control within you, and then that is how, and understanding what's where the limits are. So how would you describe your relationship with yourself currently then?
I think my relationship with myself is pretty good. I think I have a good balance right now between I've gone through phases in my life where I felt like my emotional stability was really dependent on other people. Like I needed people to approve of me, to like me, for me to feel okay. And then, there's periods of time where you're really trying to work on, not having to be overly dependent on the opinions of others. But at the same time, we're social creatures. Like we're not supposed to be able to meet all of our needs by ourselves.
Mm.
So I think I finally come to a place in my life where my relationship with myself is that I do need things from the people around me.
Mm.
And I understand that I can find a level of contentment and acceptance that doesn't require me to need to control the people around me, even if I'm not always getting what I need.
Mm. I suppose part of it is understanding what you need, and then the next part is being able to tell people. But
Yeah.
reading your story and listening to you tonight is like, I think probably a reason that you've grown up looking after yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think kind of asking for that help and connecting with people can be more difficult for people who've had to be very self-reliant as a kid?
Yeah. I think, one of the things I talk about in the book a lot are the stories that we tell ourselves. And we have stories about ourselves and our own narrative. We have stories about other people too. And we tend to sort of cement these stories in childhood. And so if we have this story that says, if I need something, that means I'm weak, or if I need something from someone that opens me up to being hurt, it's better to be alone. It's better to not need. Those are really difficult things to push past and to fight against,
Mm.
but they're pretty crucial for experiencing a fulfilling life.
Yeah, that kind of showing vulnerability, and that's part of connection, isn't it? And
Hmm.
and people like to be needed and like to feel that they're able to support you and help you. I'm saying this like like I know, but I kind of know, like I kind of know on a like conscious level. But I think that's, we can find it quite hard to accept that and accept help and accept that kind of love that people want to give us. And can you talk to us about a few times before we dive into the book, a few times in your life where you had to set boundaries? And maybe you found it challenging, or it's been something that was quite a shift for you.
Yeah, so I can think of like three examples. And one was a romantic example. Like I had a non-relationship, I guess we call that like a situationship,
Yeah.
with
Few people will
someone.
relate to that, I'm sure.
Yeah. And I really, really cared for this person. And I could tell that they cared for me and liked me, but they never really kind of said it out loud.
Hmm.
And I remember one time he came over and was like, hey, I feel as though I owe you an apology for something, but I don't even know what it is. Like,
Hmm.
I just feel like how close we got. Like he was kind of like, he's like, he had enough self-awareness to be like, I might not have been forthcoming enough or had enough integrity here or something. And we talked all into the night. And what was funny was that I was booked on a plane ticket to Guatemala the next day for a year. And I remember boarding that plane and thinking, I have to make a decision whether or not I'm really leaving this behind, or
Mm.
I'm going to keep holding on to it. Like I'm going to keep reaching out. I'm going to keep this connection open. And the reason that that was such a boundary decision for me was because I think I realized I wanted something that wasn't there,
Yeah.
but that even if it was there, that this was not an environment that was like feeding my soul. And I think what's really difficult when you're trying to decide whether to move on with someone or without someone is that there's all this potential of what they could be,
Yeah.
what it could be if they did something a little different, if they did this, if they did that. But I can only make decisions about relationships based on the information I have right now.
Mm.
I can't make decisions in relationships based on what might happen later.
Hmm.
And so, like, when I looked down at the information about, like, what information do I have right now about this person and me and what he feels about me, it's not a lot.
Mm.
And that's really painful. And
Yeah.
could it be more? Has it felt more in the past? Um, if he were to do XYZ and decide to bring the whole everything to the party, that would be great, but he isn't and he doesn't. And I have to move on. And so like even just that mental decision to move on was really, really painful. Um, but was freeing and it's not a one-time decision either. It was like a year of making that decision over and over.
That's a
But
good
I'm
point,
glad.
Katie, though. Can we just just before we give the other examples, like the idea that it's like when you actually you kind of know that something's wrong, but you know that looking into it more is going to be painful because you're not going to
Mhm.
get the answer you want. That's probably a reason that lots of us put it off for a long time or forever sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes when you really yearn for a certain type of connection and you find someone that gives you 20% of that or
Mm.
60% of that, there's this fear of, okay, I don't really want just 20%, but I want 20% more than I want 0%.
Yeah.
And we find ourselves in this kind of like hedging our bet situation where it's like, I'm afraid to let go of this like 20% because I don't want to have to live with nothing. But at the same time, if I hold on to this 20%, I might never give myself the opportunity to meet someone who can be that 100%, that connection that I'm looking for, those attributes that I really want. And so it's kind of like a leap of faith just in that decision.
Yeah, and that's the kind of advice you would give to a friend, isn't it? Or someone
Yeah.
you care about. Yeah. So that's a romantic example, and it's a good point that when you talk about boundaries in relationships, you were talking about romantic or familial or platonic, all relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my second one is a friendship example. When I was first moved into Houston, I really, really wanted new friends and I was trying really hard. And I had joined a couple of places. And it's hard because it's like when you feel like there are already groups there and you really want to belong. And I just didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. Um, and I finally kind of hooked up with this one friend and we had a few play dates. And I was going out of town and she had a pet sitting business. And so I asked her if she'd be interested in feeding my cats while we were gone. And she said, yes, absolutely. And so the whole week went pretty well. She was like sending me updates and stuff. And then when I got home, on that last day, it seemed like she hadn't been there. Like there was no food, no water, like pretty full litter box. And I asked her, like, hey, did you come yesterday? And she was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. Oh no, no, I totally did. I totally did. Because I remember it was raining and it was like got very detailed about the visit. Well, she didn't know that I had a Ring camera. And so I checked it and she had not been there. And that kind of gave me a bad taste in my mouth. And I like put some distance there. And I remember asking a friend, like, hey, do you think I should like confront her about it? And I had some friends say, like, yeah, I think that you should be honest. And so I was honest with her. And she was like, I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. I won't do it again. And then my next decision was like, well, what do I want to do with this friendship? Because it really bothered me, but I really want friends. But this time the war was between like, I think I don't want a friendship that has like deceit in it. Like that's kind of a big value for me. But at the same time, I feel guilty, sort of quote unquote punishing someone for one mistake. Like, should I give this person another try? And that's kind of where that like it's like I want to be a good person. And so would it make me a good person to give her another try, or do I need to be a boundaried person and, not put up with behavior that I think. And so we kind of get in that trap. And I remember, because I'm a therapist and a lot of times you'll watch boundaries online and therapists will give you these like very overly therapeutic scripts where you're like, no one talks that way. Where they're
What
like,
like that?
sit down with your friend and say, listen, I think our friendship has come to a place where it's not feeding me, it's not feeding you, and we ought to go our separate ways. And I remember asking a friend, like, should I say, hey, I don't want to be friends because of this thing? And literally every single one of them, even the ones that were professional therapists were like, oh God, no, just kind of go silent. Just kind of like
Ghost.
just put the distance and she'll get the picture. And they were and I remember being like, well, that doesn't sound very mature. And they were like, Casey, like this is real life. It's okay to just like slowly not answer as much, not invite her places. And so I did that. And it's true, like most people read that. Um,
Yeah. And you do talk in the book, don't you, about kind of like how deep are you into this relationship? Like
yeah,
if like a sibling had done the same thing, it would be a different
for
outcome.
sure.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Hang on just a second. My 5-year-old is homesick and she's uh, singing at the top of her lungs.
Okay, no worries.
Hyper, sweetie. Baby, you can't sing like that when I'm on a call. Thank you. Okay, sorry. Speaking of real life.
Yeah.
Okay, anyways, long story short, at one point though, she asked me, hey, I feel you pulling away. Have I done something? Now, at that point, in my opinion, the responsibilities changed
Hmm.
because I do have a responsibility to be honest with her, especially when she's asking me outright. And it was clear she wasn't understanding. Like, it's okay to rely on some nonverbal things that most people kind of understand to avoid, a conversation. But
Yeah.
if it was clear, she's like, oh, no. So then I had to tell her to say, yes, it really bothered me that you did this. And I think that we're just not a good fit for friendship. And she was really upset. And she said, I think that this is so awful and unfair. And I can't believe you're punishing me over a mistake. I'm just human. Don't you wish people would give you second chances? So the reason this was such a moment of boundaries is because in those circumstances, you have to understand whose responsibility is it to dictate what my motives and character are,
Hmm.
right? So I have to ask myself, like, am I being unfair? And that's why all those different questions in my book about like how long have I known this person? Like, what are my responsibilities to this person, right? And this was someone who I had just met. We had had maybe 2 or 3 play dates. We didn't
Yeah.
have any really interdependence. I mean, I really didn't have a responsibility to give her a second chance. Now, could I have if I wanted to, if I thought this is the coolest person in the world? And of course, sure. But I
Yeah.
don't have a responsibility to have a friendship with someone that I've just met. And
Sure.
so it's totally okay to walk away from that as long as I'm being honest and respectful with her. But if I didn't have strong boundaries, I would have heard what she was saying about my character, what she was saying about my morals, what she was saying about what I should do. And I
Yeah.
would have owned that as if it belonged to me
Yeah, sure. And
instead of saying, you know what, like and maybe I can tell you that that's not true. But really, arguing with other people about your character is always crossing boundaries.
mm,
Like, it's not my job to manage her opinion of me, right?
no.
I can make a good faith effort to correct a misunderstanding or to bring clarity to something, but by the time I've said I didn't mean it to punish you, I meant it like this, if her response is, "Nuh-uh, you
Mm,
are punishing me." Well,
yeah.
there's no more explanation. There's just fighting and arguing. And I like one of my boundaries is like, I don't argue with people about my character because people are allowed to misunderstand me. They're allowed to not like me. They're allowed to disagree with me. And the strongest boundary you can have is to allow people to purposefully misunderstand you.
Mm, yeah. That is adulting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then do you have another example? Is that
Yeah.
like family example?
Yeah. Well, no. So this example is about like just people in general, which is about being online.
Uh-huh.
And it is a similar, I kind of like teased it there about the like people misunderstanding you. When I first got online and had a little bit of a like a big following, one of the things that would eat my lunch all the time is that when people would bait me into arguments,
Mm,
I always took the bait,
mm.
especially if it was, well, you're wrong because of XYZ. And I'm like, that's not what I said.
Yeah.
Well, I can't believe you would say this. You're such a bad mom. I'm not a bad mom. Let me explain. And it
Mm,
felt like I had to chase down every opinion of me and correct it. If someone said, I don't like you because of XYZ, and the XYZ was like clearly stated, I'd be like, all right, that's fine. You just don't like me. But if they said XYZ and there was like they were like misunderstanding or
mm,
misquoting or like putting words in my mouth I never said, that I like couldn't stand. I'm like, oh no, I need to correct you. I need to change your perspective. I need you to understand me. I need you to understand me. Which we could do a whole podcast on how that comes from my own trauma, right?
yeah.
And so I had to learn a couple of things. I had to learn what were the signs in my own body that were telling me I was taking the bait,
Yeah.
where it's not really about my person and this person. It's about my need to be
Hmm.
understood so that I
Hmm.
can feel okay. And is it that person's responsibility to understand me? No.
Mm,
Is it my responsibility to control their understanding of me? No. I can if it's somebody that's important, but I don't owe every person online a restatement, right, of what I meant. But to see someone misunderstand me and just decide not to engage at all took me months of like full comment sections of just going, you know what? One of my boundaries is to look at you thinking the worst of me and going, well, that's what you think.
mm.
And it's
And
not the
basically,
truth.
what were what are your physical kind of like manifestations in your body and like when you know that something's just not right?
Yeah, my biggest one is like a tight chest.
Mhm.
Like it's almost like a panic. It's like a kernel of panic inside of a tight chest.
Yeah.
And I feel that. And then my second one is like it's kind of in that same vein. Everything becomes urgent.
Yeah.
So I
Like,
need to
yeah,
answer this right now.
sure.
I need to do this right now. Um, and usually when I'm feeling like something is really urgent, that's my cue to like step back for a second and try to evaluate like, is this truly urgent? Because if
Mhm.
it's not, but it feels urgent, that's usually my sign that I'm about to emotionally dysregulate. And
Mhm.
I don't make clear decisions when I'm emotionally dysregulated.
Sure. And a lot of the book is about that, isn't it? About
Mhm.
your regulation and other people's and how your responsibility is always on your own. And just hearing that story, I think I'm thinking about one of the exercises, the early exercises in the book about sensitivities and defense mechanisms and how they kind of set off. And when you're in a pattern, when the same thing's happening over and over again. And some of the exercises in this book are like, oh, like I feel like my relationships are generally pretty good, but I feel like even if you don't have a specific relationship in mind, when you're working through this book, you'll learn so much about yourself and about why you behave how you behave, and especially if there's things that you want to look at and maybe modify and improve.
Yeah, and I think also when we talk about emotional regulation, it's something that's kind of become a little bit more popular. And I'm very careful in the book to say like emotional regulation is not the same thing as being calm.
Hmm.
Like it's not true that the calm person in the argument is the one that's right, or that the person who can bring no emotions into it and only logic is the one that's right. Like that's not true. Because I'll sometimes like make videos or talk to people and they'll be like, oh, you're not emotionally regulated. I'm like, no, I'm angry.
Hmm.
Like I'm emotionally regulated, but I'm angry, or I'm
That's
emotionally
my emotion
regulated,
right
but I'm
now.
upset, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not the absence of emotions. It's not the absence of strong emotions. It has specifically to do with your ability to use your executive functioning in the midst of those strong emotions. And
Mm.
so, if I can still think clearly, act according to my values, assess my boundaries, that's what matters. And you
Mm.
can get to a place where, even in the midst of those strong feelings, you can do all of those things because we're not required to be stoic. And I think this is especially important for women to hear that, like, you're not required to be unemotional to be taken seriously, nor do you have to be unemotional to be able to make wise decisions. Like, this isn't about locking your emotions away. It's just about recognizing when my emotions need some, like when my nervous system needs some time to be soothed so that
Yeah.
I'm not making decisions out of like panic and knee-jerk reactions.
Sure. And that is why, because there's so many like diagrams and flow charts and lists in the book, and we love a list here. I love a list.
Hmm.
But I think that's really good because it's like at times when when you are really heightened emotionally, to be able to have a kind of go back to a plan or to like to simplify things, I think is so important. So I think that brings us on quite nicely to the decision tree, which I feel like is a big part of the book and your work. And I'd love to go through that just like a top line of that with the people who are here, and if you could just maybe talk us through some of the questions, and we'll see how people respond.
Yeah.
And if anyone has any particular relationships in mind, feel free to share them in the chat, or I mean, I'm sure you'll come up with some questions, but yeah, it'd be great to kind of go through how
Yeah.
this is a process you would go through with clients, really, isn't it?
Yeah, so I developed this decision tree because I was thinking about, I was answering questions online about relationships. And of course, as I'm answering about one situation, then somebody with a different situation is like, but wait,
Yeah.
what about X, Y, Z? And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, well, then it would be slightly different. And, instead of trying to give you a million different advices for a million different scenarios, I thought about like, what is the process I would take a client through to think through these things, and got that down in this decision tree, which is 6 questions, only 6. And there are lots of like follow up or reflection questions for each question so that people know how to answer them. But the first question is, why do I find this behavior objectionable? And the reason we start there is because if you're asking yourself the question, do I stay or do I go? Or, should I work on this longer or should I put some distance between us? It's because there's something in the relationship that you're a little unsure about. And it's usually a behavior that, is objectionable. At least we use those words. So there's 3 options to this. The option might be, I find this behavior objectionable because it hurts me or it
Mhm.
harms me in some way. Like it affects me negatively, even if it's just that it hurts my feelings.
Yeah.
It could be, though, sometimes you're worried about a behavior that actually maybe doesn't bother you all that much, but people outside of the relationship are telling you it should bother you.
Hmm.
So this could be, oh, he is of a different religion than you.
Hmm.
Or, hey, your sister is pretty wild and, I don't think you should hang out with her anymore. I mean,
Right.
just so many reasons, right? Um, and then, of course, the third one would be, this does bother me, truly, but it bothers me out of principle, not
Hmm.
because it's like negatively affecting me. And so I think the example I give in a book is like if you have a sister that uses drugs and there's a difference between a sister that uses drugs and can't get sober for family events and comes in and steals from mom and screams at everybody, or a sister that you kind of are watching as they slowly die, versus like your sister that goes to Burning Man and drops acid a couple times a year. You know what I mean? Where you're just like, I just, out of principle, I think that's immoral, or I think that's bad, or I think that's irresponsible. And so, it really helps to start there about like, why does this bother me? And then typically speaking, if it's just, out of principle, it bothers me, that kicks you down to some other questions at the end to just go, okay, well, sometimes you have to deal with it. And then sometimes that's enough to not have a relationship with someone. It depends on your responsibilities to them. But
Hmm.
the questions that'll get you to question number 2 is really if you say like, no, this behavior hurts or harms me.
Yeah, sure. I did this with I didn't invite my dad to my wedding, and this is many years ago. And so I've been kind of going through the decision tree based on that scenario. Like if I'd have had this kind of framework, and I only got to question 2 because it was like if you can maybe if you give the options, but it was like this, no, the other person is not interested in changing.
Yeah, it ends pretty
This
quickly.
situation will not change. So bye.
Yeah, the second question is, Is this person willing to work towards collaborative solutions to mitigate harm? And I want to talk about that wording because I workshopped that wording for a really long time. In layman's terms, we would say, like, is this person willing to change? But there's a real specific reason I didn't say change because, if we're talking about, okay, this person's cheating on you and you're in a monogamous romantic relationship, like, yeah, they need to be willing to change. But sometimes it's not that simple. Like, if I have a friend that has really bad ADHD and they're always late.
Hmm.
You know, is the question really, are they willing to change? And by that, do I mean, are they willing to not be late? Do I mean, are they willing to not have ADHD?
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? And so the reason that we use that word collaborate on like solutions to mitigate harm, because like mitigate means to just try and like buffer the negative effects of.
Hmm.
And when you're talking about harm or hurt that's coming or stemming from a person's personality, disability, neurotype, mental health issue, neurological issue, like that's when it's like, okay, it's not really about them changing who they are because they may not be able to do that.
Yeah.
Nor would it maybe feel respectful to be like, I need you to stop being autistic because I really need eye contact.
Yeah.
Right. Please stop having manic episodes. It really hurts me. But it's more about, there's a difference between, I think we've all had this instance, right, where we're like, hey, this bothers me, this hurts me. And someone goes, well, that's just the way I am. So deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Relate.
Right. Like, but this is my personality, but it's a mental health issue, but it's whatever. Right.
Yeah.
But, there's a difference between a roommate with ADHD that's really messy, that is willing to say, okay,
Mm.
I don't know if I'm capable of not being messy, but I am capable of like sitting down at the table with you and going, what could we do so that I'm not making your life miserable?
Hmm.
Like, what are some ideas? Like, could we go to paper plates? Could we have a Sunday morning cleanup where we both, come and do it together because that works for me and my ADHD? Like, that's what we're really talking about. It's like, are they willing to change anything to
Hmm.
mitigate the impact? So that's that. And I do talk a lot about in the book about like, well, how do we know if someone's willing? Because you really want to look at actions rather than words, but at the same time, there's a different pace of change for everyone.
Sure. And I suppose to even get to this second question, you have to bring the awareness to the situation, which for the other person they might have been oblivious to it, or they might have kind of liked not really knowing or approaching it, I suppose.
Yeah, because there's really two traps that we fall into. And one is we are overly harsh and have unreasonable expectations on people's ability when their struggle is stemming from something they don't have a lot of control over.
Yeah.
So, whether that's a mental health issue or a disability or whatever it is. And we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to just drop people because they're not perfect. We want to have compassion, understanding that we're all human and we all struggle, and some people will always struggle. But
Yeah.
at the same time, the presence of a sympathetic problem doesn't mean that that person's not an asshole.
Yeah.
Like, like jerks also have disabilities, right? Like there are kind, wonderful people that struggle with addiction. And I
Hmm.
don't want those people thrown away just because they struggle with an addiction. But
Hmm.
there are also people who are, even if they didn't have an addiction, like would be like malicious people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so we want to not just make this decision about staying or going based on how sympathetic their problems are. Or
Sure.
like, it's bad that he yells, but I know it's because of the trauma.
Yeah. I mean, I've literally highlighted so many different quotes in your book and scribbles. I do look like quite. I've had a manic episode going through the book, but I think there's a quote that you say, and it says, "A compassionate story doesn't okay bad
Doesn't
behavior,
justify
doesn't
harmful behavior.
justify." Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's, as well, it's like yeah. There's lots of reasons that people are idiots, but it's like it's not about the reason necessarily. It's about how it's impacting you and your relationship.
And this is where I think the book goes much deeper than what you see on social media about boundaries, because I think most people will talk about that. Like to some degree, there is a level of harm that it doesn't really matter how much that person can't help it. Like you're not obligated to stick around and be harmed. But it doesn't like when I everyone loves that. line. Everyone loves to go rah rah shish kebab. That's right. Don't take it. Have high standards. Kick him to the curb. You deserve better. It doesn't matter. But if you actually sit down with a person who's been married for 20 years, you sit down with someone who has gone through hell and high water with their best friend of 45 years. You sit down with someone talking about their mother-in-law that is an inextricable part of their life
Hmm.
and maybe watches their kids for them. Those little like girl boss sayings about like what you deserve and like that doesn't help them. Like at the end of the day, like we all love someone who is screwed up. Or
Hmm.
maybe we've been the person really screwed up and we needed love. And it's just not that simple.
Yeah.
But in order to get past even the second question, a person needs to have at one point had or currently has or would otherwise have if they didn't have some really serious cognitive deficit, a genuine desire to care for you,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
if they're not doing it. But like we have to get real honest with ourselves. And the easiest example that people always bring to me when they hear about this is like this helped me is interestingly enough is parents with dementia
Hmm.
because it's actually sadly common for some people, older people with dementia, to get confused, to become verbally abusive, I mean, honestly, just kind of become abusive. And what I notice is people will come to me and they'll say, you know, because my dad's abuse was stemming from dementia, I felt as though I would be a bad person if I cut him off, or if I stopped taking care of him, or if I stopped visiting him. And and so what the book talks about is like there's a really big difference between like your dad who was great to you your whole life and did his best and now is really suffering from dementia. Like that's not like if I went through the whole decision tree, the decision tree would not tell me like, yeah, kick your dad to the curb. Like the
Hmm.
decision tree would lead me and my values to say, I'm going
Yeah.
to continue to take care of my dad, even though it's abusive. He's being abusive. And I am going to have boundaries and I am going to try and protect myself.
Hmm.
But it would not feel good to me to sever that. However, what happens is that people will come to me and say, you know what? Um, my mom didn't want to change even when she didn't have dementia. My
Hmm.
mom has been a mean snake to me, you know, my whole life. My mom never wanted to look at her behavior and its impact on others. And so, while yes, this new elevation of behavior is due to her dementia or her sickness, it's just highlighting something that was already there.
Hmm.
And so that's why it's so important. It's also why we talk about willingness before ability.
Hmm. So after the second question, which is about, yeah, are they willing to
Yeah.
different ways? And then the third question,
So that's when we get into ability
yeah,
and we start to ask ourselves, you know, most people that struggle with things, um, there's a reason.
yeah,
And for most people, it's usually a sympathetic reason,
hmm,
right? And the spectrum of how much they can control their behavior, or how difficult it is to control their behavior is very wide. So you have people all the way over here who maybe they're in a schizophrenic episode, they have dementia, they in a manic episode, they truly cannot exhibit any behavioral control, right? And then you kind of move down, and maybe we have people with PTSD, people who have autistic meltdowns. Maybe we have people with personality disorders, borderline personality disorder. We have people with ADHD. We have people with trauma. We have people like, all the way down to like people that you would think, because there's this binary we get in our head where it's like if someone's just being malicious and they're bad, get rid of them. But if someone is good and they're just struggling, you're not allowed to get rid of them.
hmm,
The problem is, as a therapist, I know this, the most evil person you've ever met probably has a sympathetic reason for the way they behave. Like
yeah,
if you really got down to the roots of what happened when Johnny was 4 and
yeah,
XYZ, right? And it doesn't justify their behavior. At some point, Johnny became a man and became responsible for controlling his own behavior and healing his own trauma, right? But
hmm,
the truth is, it's not a good metric for like, oh, is there a sad reason they act this way?
hmm,
And so when we ask ourselves, is this person capable? We are specifically kind of looking for, okay, this person might be changing slowly, but also is dealing with some stuff that makes it pretty, you know, more difficult for them to change behavior than maybe somebody else. And so their difficulty and their slowness may not be an indication of their willingness. It might be an indication of their ability. And
Mm,
so, that's going to raise some different questions. Or, we go, my sister with schizophrenia, my mom with dementia, my best friend who has had a drug addiction for 45 years, and I'm not sure she even could change. Like, I need to know that. I need to
yeah.
know that they're over here because if I am going to make decisions about whether to stick with this person, I need to be aware that they might never change. I need to be aware again that I'm making decisions on the information I have right now.
Yeah,
Um,
I've been thinking about that, going back to that. That's such a good way to think about it. It's like these are the facts currently. So not
yeah,
making decisions on what might happen or what you wish would happen or that kind
yeah.
of, yeah, that ideal.
And we're just kind of sussing these things out at this level. And so when we get to question 4, there's this question that says, does staying in this relationship violate my values?
Yeah.
And it's not a question most people have ever really asked themselves because usually the question that we are wrestling with is, would leaving this relationship violate my values, right? So we're thinking, if I tell this new friend who didn't feed my cat that I won't give her a second chance, does that make me a bad person? But
Hmm.
we rarely ask ourselves, does staying in a relationship with someone who's lying to me violate my values? I don't think it would have because she was new and I like to give people second chances. However, but that's the question we need to ask first. Because when someone is harming us, yes, it matters how much they're able to stop, but there is kind of a level of harm that negates everything else. And when I talk about what my values are in the book, and I encourage the reader to kind of start with some of mine and then build their own, these are things like my physical safety,
Yeah.
my psychological safety. For me personally, it's my sobriety, it's protection of my minor children,
Mhm.
it's not being implicated in crimes that I didn't consent to, right? Like these are things that if I'm in a relationship with someone that causes these values to get transgressed. So I'm in physical danger, I'm being psychologically tormented, my children might be in danger, either physically or emotionally, I might be implicated in some crime. Like these are indications that staying in this relationship is against my values.
Yeah, sure. And when you see it like that, then it's like more of a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have to almost kind of then come up for more evidence of why you should stay in it if you're able, if that is transgressing some big deal breaker values for you.
Yeah, because it really comes down to, boundaries where we look at what our responsibilities are and what other people's responsibilities are. And in an ideal world, everyone is meeting their responsibilities to you.
Hmm.
And the truth is that sometimes they're not, and you have to make a decision about whether you want to stay or go. And I try to unmoralize that decision so that you don't feel like, well, if I stay, I'm weak, and if I go, then I'm a girl boss or whatever, because life is more complicated than that. But the truth is that it's not just about going, well, I have to decide if I'm good with them not meeting their responsibilities. It's also about going, does 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 staying cause me to not meet my responsibilities?
Hmm.
Because if there's a conflict there, I am morally obligated to meet my responsibilities.
Mm. So you talk about if you do decide to stay in a relationship or to try harder at it, then that will also mean some changes though, because you're going to be choosing to stay on the proviso that XYZ happens.
Yeah, and I mean, the next question in the tree is, do you want to stay in this relationship? And that question of do you want to has to come after, does it violate your values too? Because if it does, then the tree kind of kicks you off to like, you need to put some space, you need to disengage. And disengage doesn't necessarily mean cut someone off cold turkey or never speak to them again or go no contact. Disengage doesn't even necessarily mean end the relationship at all. In
Hmm.
some cases, it just means putting boundaries in so that there is more physical space or there's more emotional space.
Hmm.
So this could be, okay, I want to disengage with my mother. It doesn't mean I need to go no contact
Yeah.
necessarily, but maybe I change how often I talk to her. maybe I change where we meet when we do see each other so that I have an easy out. Maybe it means I don't talk about certain things with my mom because just emotionally, that's just not a good place for us to go. So disengage is more than okay, go no contact or the relationship's over.
Yeah,
Um,
and isn't that again, it's about what you have control over. Because I saw
mhm.
on one of your TikToks actually, I think it was maybe you were going through the tree, and no, it was the one about the boundaries and it that it's always your own thoughts and behaviors, and a bit of
Yeah.
pushback necessarily, but people were questioning, yeah, but what if we live together? I can't just decide not to be in the same house. But you were like, no, but you can decide how much time you spend in that room with that person when they're talking to you like that, or you can decide I won't be in a conversation when you're dysregulated or whatever it is that you can, there's always pockets of control that you can
Yeah.
protect yourself.
Yeah, and boundaries is also about like our understanding of what's happening. And so even in a situation where, I had one commenter that said, I am chronically ill, severely disabled. I literally cannot go anywhere. I have to interact with my caregiver, who is abusive. And trust me, there is zero way that I can avoid them or get away from them, whatever, whatever, whatever. Those situations exist.
Hmm.
And what boundaries is about in that situation is about understanding what of that behavior is about you, what of that behavior is a reflection on you. Um, it doesn't stop the abuse. There's no amount of having the perfect boundaries that's going to stop someone who is intent on abusing you from abusing you if you can't get away. It's about understanding that the shame of that abuse belongs to them and not you.
Mm.
That if you need to make yourself small in that moment to avoid abuse, if you need to placate in that moment to avoid abuse, that's not you being weak.
Mm.
That's not you not having boundaries. That is you having boundaries. That is you understanding this is an unstable, erratic person. I cannot control their behavior. And so I'm going to make choices based on whether or not, the risk that harm may come.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's kind of what that entails.
Yeah. And are we at the end of the decision tree?
No, so we've got one more question.
Okay.
After we ask if you want to stay in this relationship, the last question is at this time, would leaving this relationship violate your values? And so there's
Okay.
some sub questions in here. So this is when we get to those questions of, okay, there's this person in my life, they're having a mental health crisis, it's affecting me negatively, and I don't want to deal with it.
Mm.
Right. And then we go, well, am I a bad person for leaving? Because, oh my gosh, mental health matters. Well, it really matters whether the question is about a guy you've been dating for 30 days or
Mm.
your husband of 15 years.
Yeah.
It really matters whether this is about your sister who has, harmed you for over, your whole life period and has been malicious to you and, someone that hasn't. Like it really it differs. And this is when we get into whether you have religious values, whether you have cultural values, whether that is, so for example, a lot of people have cultural values about taking care of elderly parents. They
Mhm.
have spiritual or religious values about marriage. And it's not good enough to tell people that those things don't matter.
Mm.
Those things do matter. And because we have already filtered out the situations in which people are maliciously unwilling to change, and situations in which staying would violate your values of safety and self-preservation and care for your children and your other responsibilities, we're really at this point dealing with the level where like it is your right to decide that your cultural or religious or moral value towards integrity and a behavior is more meaningful to you than
Yeah.
whatever happiness you may have more or less of if you were to end this relationship.
Sure. But and that's like an empowered choice then though, isn't it? If you get to question 6, then there's lots of nuance and there's lots of context around your particular situation. So if you are
Yeah.
choosing to stay in that situation, at least you have given yourself the time to kind of work through. And yeah, that's what I love. That's what I love. It's like you give us a framework and it's so adaptable to lots of different situations. So brilliant. Thank you. I've just realized we're nearly at 8 o'clock. We've got 5 minutes left. Um, So I think we're at the end of the decision tree, but if anyone has any questions specifically around what we've talked about so far, then put them in the chat quickly and we will have a look. But yeah, I think I love how it's not simple. It's not, well, it's not easy, but it can be simple. I think that's like you're making
Yeah.
it more simple, but it's we still have to recognize that this is not relationships are not easy. I think that's what's come across tonight is that they are complicated. And as a therapist, you must see, I mean, you've given so many great examples. You see it seeing all these different levels of complications.
Yeah, I think a good example is that if you want to have like a public conversation about infidelity, it's not popular to say sometimes it's okay to stay.
Mm,
Because everybody wants, again, they want to say that kind of girl boss, like never put up with that, you're worth more, you're better. But if you're someone who has actually sat with these couples and, we're talking about 10, 20, 30, 40 years, children, a whole life, people that love each other, people that have deeply complex, intertwined lives and beings, right? And meaning and all these other values that they have floating around. The truth is like you're allowed to want things, even if it doesn't fit some kind of like cookie cutter self-help box that you would, be
mm,
some empowering logo on a coffee cup somewhere. We want you to be safe and I want you to be I don't want you to make decisions out of fear. I don't want you
mm.
to cheat yourself out of what the fullness of life could be for you because you are afraid or because you're believing in some things that are not true. But, you can open your eyes to all the things that are true and be empowered and make a decision about what you want at the end of the day, even if that's not what somebody else would want.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this. And thank you for sharing in the book. You share so much about your own story, which is so, I think it's just so helpful. It just means that people can really understand where you're coming from more. Like we've got a trainee therapist in the group actually. So just before we leave, when did you start training as a therapist and how, and what did that journey look like for you? I know, I'm
So
sure
when
I'd
I
love to know.
when I got out of rehab, I worked in rehabs. So I would volunteer. I worked as like a house manager for a halfway house. And then when I finished college, I decided to go in and do a like a graduate degree in counseling, and worked at various counseling things all through my graduate degree. So
And do you still practice as a therapist? Do you have time?
I still have my license, but I don't see clients. So I quit doing clients when I had my kids, and that's when I started like writing books and doing content.
Yeah, so sharing it with the masses.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. And I also love the term Casey. I think I've seen you use the term self-help rejects. That's who
Yeah.
your work is for. So I feel like people will love that in this group. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm sure you will have enjoyed that. A lot of people saying that they're very excited to get stuck into the book. Yeah, it will be here very soon. And yeah, thanks, Casey. I appreciate it so much. Enjoy your launch day and your launch party tonight.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.